Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna make a Nerf gun look way cooler. To be fair to my kids, I started with the same Nerf gun that they all have. It's a really good one, it shoots really far and really straight, so I thought it'd be a good base to start with. These guns come apart pretty easily with a precision screwdriver, but as soon as you open them up, you'll realize that there are springs and pieces everywhere. So I would advise taking pictures of everything before you start pulling stuff out. I put a sanding drum on my Dremel tool and then used it to shave off all the names, the warnings, the logos, all that stuff that made it look like a Nerf gun. I got it pretty smooth and then went back over it with a sanding block to smooth out the surfaces. I laid all the pieces out on my painting table and then gave them a couple of coats of gray primer. This primer does work on plastic, but not all of them do. After the primer dried, it looked pretty cool, and so I went ahead and did a couple of coats of a metallic spray paint. I used silver on some and black on some others just to give it some variation. After that dried, I made a first pass at darkening some of the lower areas in the body. Painted down in the troughs and down in the holes that were supposed to be screws, just to get a first coat down there to make them really stick out visually. There's going to be several layers of paint and highlighting to make all this look right, and so I just started by kind of putting a base coat down in the low spots. This is acrylic paint, so you can wash it off easily off your hands, you can wipe it off easily, and it works really well for just giving some definition to some of the low areas and the high areas. I didn't want to do a lot of color, but on the front of the gun I put a couple of blue spots just to make it really pop out. I stole the power inverter I had from some EL wire. You can buy them separately, but I already had this one around, so I just used it. I clipped off the end and then took the whole thing apart, and basically all I was doing here was unsoldering the wire and then resoldering it in so that it came out the other side of the board. Then I just had to drill a hole in the case so that the wire could go up through it rather than through the original hole. So I just put that back together. I had some LED strips and I cut off one section and then soldered the ends of that inverter onto that section of LED. I drilled a hole in the body and then used a Dremel tool to cut out a channel so I could feed some wire through it. I chopped off a little bit of the nozzle so that I could set the LEDs in, used the adhesive back to hold them in place, and there I had lights. Now it was a matter of just putting the whole thing back together and forcing the wire down into the channel that I had made. Make sure you put everything back in its right place, and the gun should work. To hold the inverter in place and to build up a shape, I used some epoxy sculpt modeling compound. This is a 2-part 1-to-1 mixture, and after you mix it really well, you've got a couple hours of work time, which is nice. It cures in about 24 hours. I used some of that to hold the piece in place, and then went back and sculpted around it to try to merge some of the surfaces. It sculpts really easily, and like I said, you have a couple of hours to get different amounts of detail. It pushes around just like Play-Doh, and then once you have the general shapes in place, you can use water to smooth out the surfaces, or you can let it set up a little bit and then work from there. I didn't have a very clear plan on the shape that I was going for here, but the water made it really easy to move around and to smooth out the surfaces. It was nice. So with that about done, I let it set for 24 hours so it would harden, and then it started sanding the surfaces. Once it's cured, this stuff is very hard, but it sands really nicely and really finely. You can use an orbital sander to get really smooth, flat surfaces. You can use flexible pads and flexible sandpaper to get around contours, and then even shape with the Dremel tool. After it was shaped like I wanted, I went back over everything with some 220 just to get it really smooth. I used compressed air to blow off all the dust, but the dust is very fine and it sticks to whatever surfaces you have, so I ended up using a tack cloth to try to wipe off as much as possible. I needed to add a base coat to match what I already had painted, so I masked everything off, especially the black areas. Just like before, I primed everything and added a couple of coats of color. It worked fine, but next time I think I'll use the masking tape along lines that already exist on it so that I don't have seams that I have to touch up like this. It wasn't a big deal. I sanded them down and then touched up the paint, and you couldn't even see it. I scuffed up a lot of the edges to start the weathering process, and then it was time to really get to painting. I used water, some silver paint, which actually just happened to match the spray paint that I had, and I started dry brushing. Dry brushing is when you put some paint on the brush, then you wipe the majority of it off, and then you hit just the high spots on any material. It makes it kind of look like it's weathered and scuffed, and like the paint that was supposed to be there has worn away. There are a lot of great techniques for weathering things. In this case, I went back and forth between dark paint, light paint, different shades of gray and black and silver, and just tried to mix them up. Sometimes I wiped a whole lot on and then smeared it around, trying to push it down into the grooves and to highlight some of the surfaces, really just to make it look like it wasn't a solid color. Here it is unweathered, and here it is weathered. It's getting there. Here it is all finished. I'm pretty happy with it for a first try. It's actually pretty cool that it has lights in it as well, and it still works. So there it is. My Nerf gun is all complete, and my kids are pretty jealous of it, which is fine. One of the big things that I wanted to do with this, even though I wanted to paint it and distress it and add some stuff to it, I wanted to make sure that it was functioning so that I could still have Nerf gun battles with my kids, and it is fully functioning, which is cool. Now, if you didn't want to keep it functioning, you could do a lot of stuff to actually customize it even more, make it look like something out of a video game. You know, you could change the structure a lot, but I found that on the inside of these, it's really packed with a lot of mechanics to make them work. Once you start making changes, you really have to decide whether you want to keep those mechanics in place or if you just want to, make it look like a prop. So for me, this was kind of the first step towards some prop making. I've been really interested in that for a while, but I haven't gotten to do any of it yet. And so this was a step for me to practice the painting and the weathering and try out this new material, the epoxy sculpt. I didn't get that on recommendation from anybody, so there may be a better material. That was just something I found. I thought I'd give it a shot, and I actually thought it worked really well. It does dry very, very hard, and the one negative I found is that it's pretty heavy. So if you were going to use it to make more of a costume, it probably would not be the best material because it is pretty heavy, but if you're going to make a little thing that you want to be able to sand and sculpt, it seemed like a pretty good material. But like I said, I don't really have any experience there, so if you've done some more model making or sculpting, things like that, and you have another material that you think works better, especially in like this type of case, leave it in the comments below because it might help somebody else. So if I do another one of these, one of the things I would like to do that I just didn't have time to do on this one would be to 3D print some extra pieces to kind of add on to it. Now that I'm getting some more experience with 3D printing, that will be easier to do, but at the time that I was doing this, it just didn't fit into my time frame. Now, if you were interested in the Nerf gun stuff, I know that there is a huge community of modders that actually change the guns to make them shoot farther. They do stuff to make them look different. I don't have any experience with that, and I really just wanted to handle the painting on this one. But if you're interested in that, there's a lot of stuff out there, so be sure to check that out. Now, also, if you're interested in prop stuff, there's a great site called the Replica Prop Forum. Now, there are a ton of people there sharing a ton of information about all sorts of props and materials and methods and all sorts of stuff, and it's a fantastic resource. So if that's something that's interesting to you, be sure to check that site out because I think you'll find a lot of good stuff there. I love to hear your feedback on stuff like this, so if you like this one, let me know at iliketomakestuff.com or in the comments down below here on YouTube. I've got a lot of other projects for you to check out, and if you want to help support these videos, Patreon is a fantastic way to do that because you get some exclusive rewards, you get early access to content, and a bunch of other stuff. So be sure to check that out. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.